Um, it is 7 o'clock here in Belize City. I don't know where it is like where everywhere else out there. Um, we don't really have to. Okay. Look who's on. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Welcome to our show for this evening. We're on the eve of Thanksgiving. Everybody's preparing for their feast tomorrow. The turkeys have run and hide as best they can. But trust me, most of them will be caught, butchered, and put on the table. I am G. Michael Reed, joined by the two co-hosts, Mr. Joe Coway and Mr. Gregory Morrison. Gentlemen, good evening and welcome to the show.
Good evening.
Good
Good
evening.
evening.
I
And
see, and yeah, go ahead.
no, I was just going to say, I see we have Christina here.
Yeah,
Good
I see
evening.
our guest is in the house. Good evening, Miss Cook. How are you?
Good evening. I'm well, thank you.
All right, we're hearing you loud and clear. It's a pleasure to make your acquaintance. I have admired your work, your determination, your stick to itiveness as you've dragged that case through court and now stand victorious. May I ask, do you feel victorious? Do you feel like you have accomplished what you set out to do?
Yes, I mean, I don't think we've accomplished everything that we set out to do, but certainly there have been some significant milestones. I would say the struggle is strong and it's ongoing. It's a struggle for justice and equality, and I think that those are very difficult issues that any group of people globally and in Belize would find that they would fully accomplish in any given time. So, yes, I think that there have been significant wins.
Speaking of standing on the shoulder of giants, Julian Shaw, I believe he was the one that started out the whole move down there to try to get that situation in control. Do you credit him for a lot of the groundwork that was put into building the Maya Leaders Alliance?
Yes, of course, absolutely. Him and many other leaders before him.
Uh,
Julian was a significant part of the Maya movement, the earlier parts of it, but there were others before him. Julian was actually my brother-in-law, and
mhm.
so I'm actually literally and otherwise a student of his.
Was there ever a determination as to what happened with Julian? I mean, did anybody come to a conclusion, a firm conclusion?
No, no, that case was not fully, as in my opinion, not fully investigated. Certainly, we have our suspicions as to his death. It's always been a case that went unresolved. Of course, it was ruled an accidental fall, but we have reasons to believe otherwise.
Yeah, I remember it being he was on a roof or something and fell off, no, and just happened uh, um, to fall off and die. Interesting. It's such one of those unsolved mysteries. Now, Christina, what exactly do what could you if you can sum up for us the Mayan struggle? What exactly did you? Some people are suggesting that it's three quarters of the Toledo district. Can you tell us more or less what the Mayan struggle is and what the goal is that you are trying to achieve?
Sure. Um, First of all, maybe we should start by understanding why the Maya people went to court to begin with. Um, This is a series of strategic litigation that started way back in the mid 1990s. The first time that the Maya people actually went to court, their case was not heard. It was not brought to a hearing. And they were going to court because of the numerous logging concessions that were granted in and around their villages, of course, without their involvement, without their consent, without understanding how in the world these permits would be granted, not considering their use and occupation of those lands. And at that time, the government basically told them that those were national lands, that they didn't have a right to own those lands, that in fact they were merely squatters on those lands. And so the Maya people felt that their human rights were being violated, and they felt that they needed to find some redress and protection of their land tenure security. And so they went to the court. The court did not bring it to a hearing, as I said, in the first instance. So they went to an international body, the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, to ask the question of whether or not their human rights were being violated for failure on the part of the government to recognize their rights to those lands and resources. And that international body, of course, it took a while for it to bring its report together, to bring its merit report together and its recommendations together. Unfortunately, that recommendations did not come out until 2004, years after Julian's passing. Nevertheless, it became a sort of a springboard for Maya people to then say, well, if an international body has agreed with us, then we might want to go back and test this again by talking to the government. And so they tried again to really sit down with the government to find some resolve. But of course, their cries went unheard. So they later then filed another case in the Supreme Court. That was in 2007. And I know I've listened to some of your shows and there was some confusion as to what happened then. In 2007, when they won their first case in the Supreme Court, they had taken two model villages, Conejo and Santa Cruz, and they won. The court affirmed that their customary land tenure exists. The way they use the land exists. It's a distinct way. It's a customary land tenure system. And the court found that they have long-standing use and occupation by way of a historical continuity on this land, where these 41 Maya villages currently are located. And because of that, then, the court found that they also have then collective and individual property rights within the meaning of Section 3D and 17 of the Constitution. That's basically what the court found in the 2007 decision.
Christina, let me interrupt you. Give us that that part of the Constitution again that the ruling was based on.
It's Sections 3D and 17 of the Constitution.
Okay. Go ahead. Sorry. All right, continue.
That's okay. So that case was never appealed. That case was won for Santa Cruz and Conejo. It was never appealed. So you're correct, Mr. Morrison.
Yes.
But you will remember that the government was changing around that time.
That's
we
correct.
were having an election around that time.
Yes.
And so when the new government came into office, they basically gave a limited interpretation of that decision. They said that that decision only applies to Conejo and Santa Cruz. But of course, it wasn't just those two communities that were seeing these violations and that were concerned about their land tenure insecurity. And so this led then to a second case being filed in 2008. This case took a little bit longer, but we got a decision in 2010, again, adopting what the Supreme Court had already said in the 2007 case. At this time, though, the government decided that they were going to appeal this decision. They weren't happy with the decision. They fought it. They appealed it to the Court of Appeals, and that decision of the Court of Appeals came in 2013. Following the Court of Appeals, the government was still unsatisfied, and so they appealed it to the highest appellate court, which is the Caribbean Court of Justice. And it is at this highest appellate court that then we came to a consent agreement. So at every level, we have been successful in proving our historical continuity to this land and in establishing that we have a land tenure system that needs to be protected under
Could
the
you
law of Belize.
could you just speak a little bit about what a consent agreement is? Is that just basically both parties stepping aside and saying we will not pursue a case in the court, but we will go and sort of with some conditions laid out by the court, sort of come to a understanding of what the decisions should be on the land tenure? Is that, could you explain that for me?
Yes, a consent agreement is, we arrived at that one because I think the government saw the writing on the wall, so to speak. They had lost at every level, and we were spending a significant amount of time in court. And so prior to the Caribbean Court of Justice providing a decision, they approached the other side, they approached our side, and they asked us if we would agree to settle this matter outside of court. Of course, because we have had a historical, very difficult relationship with the government, where we don't believe always that their words are honorable, our leaders advised us that if they were willing to sit and settle, we would have to do that before the courts. And so we went before the Caribbean Court of Justice to indicate that the government had asked us to settle. And so we went there before the courts, and a consent agreement was entered, an agreement between both parties, an agreement basically to several things. Let me outline that. First,
But before you jump there, a consent agreement, however, though, is that a court ruling of a decision, making a decision, or is that just that's what I wanted to also?
It's a decision. It's a decision that was not imposed by the court. It's a decision that both parties came to.
Yes. Okay. Yes.
But there is also, right, a judgment of the court which outlines what that decision was.
Okay.
And in that outline of the court's judgment, it actually adopts the decisions of the lower courts, the decisions of the Supreme Court and the Court of Appeals.
Christina,
Which was basically just a moment. Which was just basically the agreement that there is land tenure and that some program needs to be worked out to make it agreeable to the parties, right?
Yes, let me outline very briefly and in this most simple language that I can. One, it established, it affirmed that Maya land tenure exists. So the court did not give us anything, right? Okay. The court just simply affirmed what already existed, that we have had a long-standing use and occupation of these lands, and that by virtue of that, then we have collective and individual property within the meaning of the Constitution of Belize, the sections that I already mentioned. Two, it basically said that the government has an obligation to identify where those lands are and to put in place protections for those lands. So the consent order told the government, basically, you have to work with the Maya people to clearly define, delimit the territories, the land that they are customarily using and occupying, where these 41 Maya villages are. And that you have to establish a mechanism, some way to protect these rights, these property rights. And then 4, the government was told that in the interim, meanwhile, we do all these things, we must protect the status quo of the land. For example, you can't drag this on for so long, and in the meantime, you go and you take everything that's valuable from the land until you can give it to them, right? So what they did in paragraph 4 was to say, in the interim, the government should cease and desist from granting any further land sales, land grants, concessions, permits, anything that might affect the use and enjoyment of these lands by the Maya villages, unless they give their free, prior, informed consent. That's sort of the bulk of what the consent agreement was.
Christina, hold on, Gregory. Christina, from time to time, we have people who will be giving comments and maybe asking questions. You might see them flash on the screen. We will read a few of them to you as we go along.
No problem.
There are 41 villages comprising the Maya settlement as such. Could you comment to the question as to the size of the Toledo district, the portion of the Toledo district that you guys are suggesting should be communal lands?
Yes, there are 41 Maya villages in the Toledo district. The Toledo has a total of about, I want to say, of about maybe 50 villages in the Toledo district. I was actually trying to do a count today because I wanted to give you a more accurate figure. And so what that says then is that there are a majority of the villages in the Toledo district that are Maya villages. So it's not a surprise that a majority of the lands in the Toledo district are being used and occupied by Maya villages.
Would you say about 3/4 of the district? Is that correct?
I don't have a figure, I have to say, and maybe what we should talk about then is where we are in that process. We are in the process of identifying where those lands are. That process is ongoing. It's not yet completed. And to begin that process, we had to develop jointly with the government a procedure for mapping, a procedure for identifying where those lands are, because it can't be that you just make an arbitrary claim, right? You have to show that you're actually using and occupying that land. The government has to go in and verify. The government then has to come in and demarcate and title and register those titles. And so it's hard to know, it's undetermined still, how much land. I know that there's been some numbers thrown out there. I've heard
Is there a map? Is there a map of some sort to suggest where some of this land might be?
Is there a map? I know that was being put around a lot. There are many maps, but let's explain what those maps are. The government brought us a map early in the process. This was under the previous administration when Ms. Alamia was the chair of the commission. They brought us a map to ask the villages on the periphery to unofficially show where they believe the extent of their use went. And the purpose of this map was to indicate to the government the perimeter in which they would do a third-party inventory. Let me explain what a third-party inventory is. The government promised that they would look at how many private land holdings or lease holdings exist within this area that could potentially become recognized and demarcated as Maya customary lands. And so in order to do that, they developed what they call an indicative analytical map. It's not a map of the Maya lands officially. The government then showed this map with an overlay of the villages labeled on the map to the Caribbean Court of Justice most recently. And in their overlay, they also showed some concentric circles around each village, only to demonstrate how much land is being used by the Maya and how the Mayas use those lands. Unfortunately, it's regrettable and distressing that this has stirred up a lot of fear and a lot of animosity and maybe even jealousy. But the fact is that the land has been used by these villages is the land that is being claimed. You certainly could agree that ever since we went to the court in 2007, we were already aware of what lands we were talking about. Certainly when the logging in the mid-1990s was happening, these were also the lands that we were defending. And you know, it's really interesting that when the Malaysians were here and given permission to log all those lands, there was no noise about it, other than, of course, from the Maya people themselves. So the point I'm making here is that our case has been public for the last 3 decades. Unfortunately, it's until now that a lot of people are paying attention, and I'm very happy that they are. So the official map of where these customary lands will be identified is still not yet made. These need to be made. There's an agreed process, as I said, for making these maps. The village will have to have a map that matches their collective title. And it starts, like I said, with auto delimitation, verification, followed by demarcation surveying, official surveying, and registered titles.
Well, you speak now of attention being paid. Now, that attention is not all in favor of the Mayans, of course. There are people who have questions. Somebody asked a while ago, what about national parks? What about archaeological sites? Are these also included in the land, the customary land?
There are some where Maya people have been using the lands, where national parks have since been established. So there are those kinds of competing interests. Those are also considered right alongside the third-party interests that I spoke about. And maybe if I can elaborate on that. I've heard previous shows of yours talk about individual private properties that are within what might be claimed as customary land of the Maya. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Okay.
So in the case of private land holdings, right, what is very clear from the consent order and what is very clearly understood, I believe, by the government and by the Maya people themselves, is that the Constitution provides that no Belizean, no individual with private property could be arbitrarily deprived of their property, just taken away from them. So when we talk about forcing people off the land or trying to take away what already existed, that's simply untrue. It's not possible. And if
what happens though if somebody is in there, has a piece of land in there, what happens?
So what happens is that they also have their rights, their property rights also have to be protected. And what the Constitution says is that if the government wants to take away that land from them, it can only do so for a public purpose, and it has to compensate them, reasonably compensate within a reasonable time. That applies as well to third parties, right? So what we imagine would happen once they've developed the inventory, they would look and see, are these third parties in an area that's being claimed by one of the Maya villages? And let's imagine two scenarios here, because there are two different kinds of cases that could happen, right? First, let's imagine a scenario where that is a private land holding by members of the very same community. What happens then? Those will be protected under the collective title, right? Registering this individual interest to the member of that village, because the collective title affords individual derivative rights. So it's not that it's a free for all or that they lose that land. They are members of the village and therefore they have an individual interest in it. The only difference is that that land no longer belongs to the government. It is under the collective ownership and title of the village. So the village will have legal personality for it. A second scenario is where the private land holdings are people that are not members of the community. They could be other Belizeans, they could be foreigners, they could be companies. What will happen in this case, these would be considered the third parties that I've been talking about. And in this case, the government will either have to take that land away from the community and reasonably compensate the community for what is taken, or they will have to return those lands to the community and reasonably compensate the private individual for what was taken from them. The government has agreed, like I said, to do this third-party inventory. They can ascertain how many and how these will be resolved through the legislation that they are currently drafting. So nobody's private land holdings will be taken arbitrarily. And as far as I know, nobody has been pushed off any of their private lands. This is still something that is going to be determined with the establishment of that law.
What concerns me?
Yes, go ahead.
I was going to say what concerns me, and the way I see it is that you could have communal land and still have private land with the private interests remaining with those people, and they remain on their land even though it's surrounded by the communal land, and they lose no value. They don't have to be part of a cooperative. They don't have to be part of anything to continue to maintain their rights to their land, and having the government taking their land away from them and paying them and try to resettle them in some other place because this portion of land is in the area of the communal land title. So that seems a little problematic, to think that people would be willing to give up their rights to their land, and and be compensated for it when they have spent as much time or more time than some of the Mayans that have been living there. Because one of the big problem we have, and maybe you'll speak to this a little bit, is that many of the Mayans that are within those areas are relatively recent arrival to the country of Belize. When I say that, I mean it may have been a couple of generations, right? And because the area has changed significantly over the last 75 years or 100 years, but some of the other people that are there have been in that area for hundreds of years. Before the great influx of Mayan that came over into Belize in the last 75 years, second generation, third generations now. The area, as many experience have indicated from people that have been living in the areas, indicate that the area was not as populated with Mayas. That yes, there were villages. Yes, there is the idea of communal land rights, but it has expanded now with the new population that is now seem to be superseding some of the original people that had inhabited that land and had made use of it over the years.
Okay, so now you're speaking to the issue of indigeneity. Are the Mayas indigenous to Belize, or are they recent migrants? There's been a lot of arguments around that. That was an argument, in fact, that the government held very strongly when we were before the courts and defended very strongly. Unfortunately, they weren't able to convince the court that this was the case. What the evidence that was proven in court was that the Maya people have had a historical continuity to their ancestors who lived in and around this area long before there was a Belize, long before there were national borders. And I have heard the arguments, even on your show, that, well, what does it mean to be indigenous? And whether or not other ethnic groups are indigenous to Belize, those who have been here longer, and that some Mayas were forcefully removed. I know by your own admission, you have said that some of the Maya people were forcefully removed and have returned back, and so they're recent migrants. So let's discuss that. The Maya people, based on the international accepted definition of indigeneity, it defines indigenous as indigenous communities and peoples are nations are those which, having a historical continuity with pre-invasion and pre-colonial societies that developed on their territories, consider themselves distinct from other sectors of the society now prevailing on those territories or parts of them. Another accepted definition is that indigenous describes any group of people native to a specific region. In other words, it refers to people who have lived here before the colonists, before the settlers arrived, before there were defined boundaries or borders, and they began to occupy this land. So if on one vein we can say, well, these people who have lived here for several generations, and I know we've talked about how the East Indians have been here for several generations, the Creoles, the Garifuna. If we can, in that same vein, then say, why do we have difficulty then accepting that the Maya people themselves have been here that long, if not more?
I don't think we have difficulty with that. I think those other groups are not making a claim, a land claim of an entire area, saying they have been here, and therefore, even though they may not have been present in the numbers when these other groups came, they are now in a greater presence and now to be claiming areas that are currently occupied. I think there will continue to be issues around that particular scenario. And in my mind, I believe somehow they will have to come to some understanding and limit some of those issues. And I know it's a negotiating type of idea that will have to precede this, and the government will make the final decision. But I don't know if it's a negotiating stance to be making this wide swath of claim. But I think when it starts infringing on what seem to be property rights of other and the rights of other communities, it becomes just difficult to try to find solutions.
But I don't think that anybody's infringing. If the question is whether or not Maya people can infringe on other people's rights, I think the answer is very clear that they can't.
But they are when they make that claim to such an expansive portion of land that has been occupied by others.
But Mr. Morrison, they are
Yes.
claiming what they already use and occupy. That is what they are.
Sorry, can
Go ahead, Joe. Go ahead.
I take it that the court, in affirming the consent order, was quite specific as to the villages that the Mayan customary rights will refer to. So to me, it's not a question really now of whether those people who are there or pre-colonialist, pre-sovereignty are after, because that has been settled by the court. That's what I understand from the court.
Yes, it has been settled that the Maya people are indigenous. They are indigenous.
So to me, the issue indeed is that the demarcation will be an issue, it seems, as to when they can, in fact, finally demarcate that these are the lands that the consent order affirmed by the court is referring to, because that's the matter. So my question is this, that there has been, the court, when he affirmed the consent order, give the directives, which I think you mentioned, of the codifying into law, making legislation, making proper administrative mechanisms and other appropriate mechanisms to effect the consent order. So I think those areas really, as the court has given, it's a matter now of implementing. So where are we with those mechanisms, which I think you have been mentioning some, like the demarcating of the area? Has there any legislation yet?
There's no legislation.
No legislation.
There's no legislation.
This will come, I suppose, after the demarcation.
No. It's supposed to be happening.
Like
it's supposed to be happening in parallel with each other, right? You all remember that we got the decision in 2015. That's when the consent order was passed. It's been 8 years. And both administrations has really dragged their feet on this. They've been really delayed in the implementation. All right, but recently we have heard and we saw, and I know you talked about this on your last show, that the cabinet had a special meeting to deliberate on a draft Maya land tenure policy. That Maya land tenure policy, to some degree, has been consulted with us on this side. They have met with both Maya and non-Maya village leaders. We have seen the draft of the Maya land tenure policy that the government drafted. We have provided our inputs. Like you said, it's a negotiated process. And I know that the cabinet had a special meeting to deliberate on this and to get guidance from their senior counsel. Their senior counsel that's leading the government's team is Senior Counsel Marshall-elect.
Yes,
Marshall-elect. And, they will have to continue to go back to the court with us, because the court has maintained supervision over their consent order. We have to go back to the court to report on the status, where we are with that. This policy will inform the development of the legislation. So this policy will set a framework for developing.
So this is like the precursor to what is
correct.
Codified into law.
Precursor to the legislation, yes.
Christina, you are saying that the policy, which was enunciated by the cabinet, has the full agreement of the Mayan group?
No, doesn't have the full agreement. We have seen the policy. We have provided our inputs on how to improve that policy so that it is consistent with what the court found and with what international law and standards say with regards to the nature of rights to indigenous peoples. We have provided whatever inputs. Whether or not those will be considered is yet to be determined. But certainly those who are governing and those who are making decisions, ultimately, they are the ones who pass law in this country. So they will have to take all things into consideration.
Christina, would you say that as the precursor to the legislation, there are some
yes,
who I understand are looking for individual ownership from Mayans. Is that still so? Rather than the collective approach. Are these people also be taken into account in the legislation?
Everybody has to be taken into account. The government has a duty and an obligation to meet with everybody, all stakeholders. And I believe they have tried. The question is, though, what will end up becoming the legislation?
Yeah.
A couple of questions. I know that there are two Mayan types of Mayans, the Mopan and the Quechua that I know of. Are there others, or just those are the two basic ones?
In Belize, you mean? There are
in Belize,
three.
yes, in Belize, in Northern area, and those
Yes.
that are in question.
Yes.
Now, of the 41 villages, how many are Mayan, would you say, and how many are Mopan, and how many are Quechua?
So let me go back to your first question. There are three groups of Maya people in Belize: the Yucatec, the Mopan, and the Quechua. In southern Belize is where the Quechua and the Mopan are mostly concentrated. And in the 41 Maya villages, we have about 7 Mopan Maya villages. The remainder are predominantly Quechua with some mixed villages.
Are they all united on this front? Do you speak for all the Mayans as such, or are there some that aren't in line with the program as such?
Okay, so are they united? If you
Yes.
ask me that question in the mid-1990s, they were pretty united, very, very united. Our unity has, of course, been threatened many, many times with the narratives with the attempts to divide, really. Of course, things have changed as well. And so there are some members of our community who would prefer individual private title, which is their right as a Belizean. They should be able to choose what works in their best interests. So the majority of the villages who still are pursuing a collective title, those are the ones who continue to advocate for the implementation of this consent order. Naturally, there are villages, right? There are some villages who don't want to subscribe to this collective title. We've seen that in the news. We've seen that all over. Some of them have voiced that publicly. And so you do have communities. Part of it is really to understand the context behind all of that, right? There are some communities who have lost a significant portion of their collective lands, either that it is all individually parceled now, or it has been sold and bought by foreigners or outsiders. And have deviated significantly from the customary land tenure system. What happens to them if they decide that, you know what, this does not work in our favor, we are not going to subscribe to it? It means that if there's any remaining customary lands, then that reverts back to the ownership by the government. It becomes national lands, and the government can then distribute that to whomever they see they want to.
Christina, do you speak as a Belizean first or as a Mayan first?
I don't think that there's a contradiction to how I speak. I am a proud Belizean woman, and I am also a person.
Yeah, now, but we have people down south like the East Indians. They've been there for a while. The Garifuna are now down there, and some have been there quite a while. Can we look forward to a day maybe that where everybody can work together as just a Belizean community and have a cohesive gathering, if you will, communities down there where everybody's working together, or is everybody going to stay divided and by themselves?
Well, Mr. Reed, I think that we don't have a choice. I think that we have to continue to try to aspire to have everybody work together. I think that it's very clear, and one way to understand it is to understand that what the Maya people are fighting for is basic human rights. And if you understand human rights and you look under the section of fundamental rights and freedoms under the Constitution, property rights are protected under this human rights. And so if you see property rights, land rights, Maya land rights as human rights, then you will see that it is equal to all other Belizeans' property rights. And you will see that what the Maya people are clamoring for then is to become included as a part of, as an integral part of the society of Belize. And so I don't see that as necessarily contentious. And again, I want to emphasize that what the courts affirmed, what the courts recognized, is not the Maya people's full, let's say, it's not giving the Maya people the freedom to infringe on anybody's rights. We are still under the Constitution of Belize. We are still under the laws of Belize. We still have to comply with the laws of Belize. And so it's important to understand that. I think that a lot of the fear and a lot of the animosity and a lot of the division really resonated with the fact that there's been a denial and just to put it bluntly, there's been a real disconnect with recognizing that Maya people are Belizeans and that they also have rights to property like all other Belizeans.
Let me read this one first. Sorry, Greg. Some Maya feel that you own a lot of property, yet are advocating for communal ownership to them. How do you respond to that?
No, I've heard that before. In fact, I've had people put up land documents that have Christina Koch on it. Unfortunately, there's more than one Christina Koch in Belize. And as much as I try to go claim my piece of property in San Pedro and Burgers Key, it's the wrong Christina Koch. I do not have a lot of private land in Belize. And I don't see how that would matter one way or the other. As a Belizean, if I can afford it, like any other Belizean, I can buy property from the government. I can own a piece of land anywhere in this country. Unfortunately, the reality is that the majority of my people cannot afford it and have not been able to afford it.
But Christina, let's look at that from the other side. Can somebody just go into the Mayan area and buy a piece of communal land? Can they buy it from the community? Can they buy it from the government? Can they acquire any land in that area at all, unless you're a Mayan?
They can't buy it from the government because the courts have recognized the ownership to the village itself. Can they buy it from the village?
But isn't that kind of like a tricky situation there where the court is saying you don't own Belize, government, you don't own all of Belize, the Mayans own a part of it, tantamount almost to balkanization, don't you think?
It's not balkanization, but let's talk about balkanization. I was hoping this would come up because I know that you have spent a significant amount of time talking about this. Right. If you will allow me, let me elaborate on the issue of balkanization. First, let us remember where it started, where this idea of balkanization came from. The first time I heard of it was April 4, 2007, shortly after we had won the case. It was the then Prime Minister Said Musa that spoke of his difficulty with the Maya. And this is what he said. He said, I will not preside over the balkanization of Belize, that this part of Belize is strictly for the Maya, or that part is strictly for the Garifuna, and so on, because that will result in the disintegration of our nation as Belize. Not only did he infer things about our struggle that are untrue, it makes no sense at all to me. Let me explain. Balkanization is a term used by geographers to describe a situation where a territorial nation state like Belize breaks apart into several pieces, in separate pieces, usually along ethnic lines, and typically through violent process such as war. They use the word balkanization because in the southeast of Europe, there is a mountain range called the Balkans. This region has been a meeting point of Europe, Russia, the Middle East, and over the past 200 years, and as we see today, it has been one of the most turbulent regions with wars over land. This was used to make the Maya seem to be outlaws. We are one of the most peaceful people. In other words, they were essentially saying those radical Mayas are trying to rip our country apart.
But no, Christina. Just because it's for the bulk, we understand the history of balkanization, where it comes from and whatnot. But the term balkanization means something different. A country within a country. Basically,
Yes.
that's I think how most people understand it. And this
Can I
isn't
add
this kind
something
of like
to
what
that?
we're doing here.
Yeah, I think the court has made it quite clear in this ruling. At the end, it mentioned clearly, I think in the last paragraph, it said that the constitution and authority over the country remains that of the government.
Yes.
So I think it made it clear that there is no balkanization.
It's very
because
clear.
The government retains, and it
in
made it quite clear
essence-
in the ruling, in the Caribbean
In
Court of Justice
essence,
ruling.
we are
It said
not,
that the constitutional authority remains with the government over the whole country.
and the proof is that we're not demanding our own government. We're not asking to leave Belize or to make our own country. We're not asking for a linguistic or cultural sovereignty, for example. We're not asking for a new currency. We're not asking for secession from Belize. In fact, to the contrary, what we're asking for today is to be a demand to be included. Right?
But you might be asking for trouble. What about when Mayans go into other villages and buy land there and decide they want to reside there? Don't you think it's going to cause some kind of hard feelings and whatnot, that they can't go into the Mayan community and own land, but you can come into the other communities and own land?
Okay, let's dissect that. So just like anywhere you go in Belize, Belizeans are free to go wherever they want to go in Belize. Anybody can come to the Maya villages and ask for permission to live there. No, it's like you. If you own a private property in Belize City, and I go to Belize City, I can't just come into your private property without asking you.
You could come into my neighborhood.
I could come into your neighborhood.
Well, which is a different thing from coming. You can't come into my property.
Exactly.
But you're saying you have a bigger property than I do. That's basically all it is.
Essentially. So, and if I came, even if I just came to your neighborhood, for instance, I couldn't just take somebody else's property. I have to buy it or lease it or rent it. I have to follow the laws of that town, city, whatever regulations are there, building codes, all these things. The same is true in Maya communities, right? The only difference is that the highest authority for decision making rests with the village meeting. It's the village meeting that determines, that makes decisions on what happens on those collective lands. And so that's pretty much the biggest difference. And so when you say, well, are you asking for trouble? You all know that Maya people live all over this country. That's a fact. We all know that foreigners live all over this country, because anybody that's a Belizean has a right to property anywhere.
But no one else is asking for communal lands.
Nobody else is asking for communal lands because nobody else practices that form of customary land tenure.
No, that's explain that to us.
That's not true. That's not true. There are lots of other groups that practice use of the land in very similar. People don't change how they use the land. No group use the land any different. They have farms. They use water. I mean, from the streams. That's a traditional and necessary process for all human beings. It's not, the Mayan in how they use the land is not particularly unique to any group.
Well,
I mean, when you live in village life, in the city, everything is different, and even Mayans, when they come to the city, adapts differently because it's a different way of living. But when you live in the villages, the same is the same for all people.
Right. And so let's say there is a community who says, you know what, I use this land in a particular way. I want it to be recognized as my property. Nothing bars them from asserting that. Nothing bars.
I agree. I just wanted to make sure that we understand that all communities and people.
The only difference is that there is an affirmation in terms of the Maya land tenure system that exists. They had to go to the court to fight for it because it's not easy. I mean, I don't know if the government will treat other groups differently if they made the same assertion. But certainly in our case, it was not received well, and we were fought all the way to the highest court.
May I ask a question? If the Mayans look at this situation and realize that it's going to result in disharmony, problems between our different peoples in this nation, would the Mayans be disposed to say, let us look at this again, given there is a consent order, let us, the Mayans, try to work with you, government, in a more amicable way where that everybody can come out of this feeling satisfied. Not just the Mayan, not just the Garifuna, not just the East Indians, and not just the Creole, but the Belizeans as a whole. If we're not all happy, this is going to be a problem that could turn very ugly very quickly.
Let me just add something there. I just wanted to say, I do believe indigenous people, whoever they are, right, are better stewards of the land than government, right? And people that are just coming to exploit the land and such. So there is advantage to always have that control of the land in the hands of the local people and holding government accountable. And that's why I kind of admired when the Mayan made that first step to stop the logging that was done on the land without consultation. You can go ahead.
Thank you, Greg, for that. Well, let me answer it this way. We all know that indigenous peoples globally, not just in Belize, all over the world, Maya people here, Maya people all over the world, all over this region, we have suffered from historic injustices as a result of colonization and the dispossession of our lands, territories, and resources. We all know that this is a historical fact. And thus, it has prevented us from exercising, in particular, our right to development in accordance with our own needs and interests. And so, because of these historical injustices, then, world leaders came together, including Belize, and they agreed to some minimum standards that they would follow in the respect of indigenous people's rights. I say that because that is the basis on which we began this struggle. Emerging out of these historical injustices. So it's not by choice that the Maya people were dispossessed of their lands to begin with and now have to defend and fight for their customary lands. But let me just say that the Maya people believe all property rights under the Constitution of Belize should be protected. All property rights, not just theirs, for themselves and for others. If there are Belizeans, if there are foreigners that have private land holdings that are deemed to be on Maya customary land, then they will have to be protected as well, right? Their property rights, their lands cannot be arbitrarily taken. They have to be compensated within a reasonable time.
Or what if they don't want to give up
that? Nobody wants that.
Then the village gets compensated within a reasonable time. Right, but these
but how could they? If that's the contention.
Yeah, you need to explain that more, Christina, because
if people have been living on that land for generations, they have more rights and equal rights to whatever that indigenous claim.
Equal rights.
Whatever that indigenous claim is, and therefore they just have to be settled there with their rights and their property intact, and nobody trying to buy them out, nobody harassing them or anything. They just own that piece of private property within that communal land area with all rights that private property entitles them to.
Yes, you're correct.
And nobody should be trying to buy them out or compensating them.
Nobody's trying to buy them out.
If they want to sell, that is up to them. And it would be a private transaction. If they want to sell to a private individual, that's their case. If they want to sell to the Maya communal rights organization, that's up to them. But
so, Greg, let me ask you this: everything that you have described, that's also a right afforded to the customary lands of the Maya people, right? Yes. So everything that you've described, they can't just be put out of their land. It can't be arbitrarily taken. If they don't want to move, they don't have to move, So these are what you call competing claims. These are disputes. Where do you go to resolve those disputes, right? How do you resolve
But I don't see that even as a dispute, Christina. I see that as an inherent right. That
both for the
whatever this case now is
and Maya
bringing about,
communities.
whatever this case is bringing about now cannot impose and take away those rights that had existed before this case was
But this
ruled on.
case, but this is where you're confused, because this case did not just bring about those rights. The rights of the Maya people did not start in 2015 when the consent order was given. The rights have existed, just like you are making the argument that the rights existed for that private landowner. So these rights did not just occur in 2015.
But
These rights
these
have been
people were
found
not there. These people were not there in that making that usage in all those times when those other rights had existed, Christina. See,
Well, that
I
doesn't mean
think we are
that
presupposing.
that was determined by the court. Those arguments were held in the court.
No, because it has not
I'd like
determined
to,
what the size of the court has not determined what the size of the communal land right claim is. So that is something that is to be negotiated, and
Yes,
it's to be
I agree.
negotiated based on prior existing rights of property of private property rights.
Not on prior existing rights. It's to be negotiated based on what is in fact the title. Let's say it's a fee simple title that this person has, right? What's a fee simple title? It's a property that you brought from the government, right? That's a fee simple title. It has to be looked at, and the government, under the Constitution of Belize, has the right to take the land for public purpose and to compensate for, to give a reasonable compensation. That's what the Constitution says. I'm not making
Right.
this up.
No, we all understand.
So in this case, what you're saying is that, listen, you can't take mine, but we can take yours.
No, I didn't say that.
Okay, but so what are you saying?
Because
I
I'm saying that let's just put a date. A date one.
But why are you putting a date?
No, because no, because I don't believe the land claim is so completely established. We're putting boundaries today. We're putting boundaries today. We're putting boundaries today, right? But somebody needs to determine, not because the Mayan claim a certain boundary point, that is the boundary that needs to be satisfied in a
Greg, that's what I said from the get-go, that this is to be determined, that the government has to come in and verify, that both sides have to prove continuous use and occupation, that the government has to come in and do their verification. Unfortunately, they've been delayed in doing it, and part of the delay is causing a lot of the confusion and a lot of the of this tension, right?
Clinton, go ahead, Christina. Clinton, I want you to put that back up again. That last one you had up. Go ahead, Christina. I want. There was an interesting comment that was up there. Apparently, it's one of the Mayan persons that was commenting. Christina, you speak on behalf of what percentage of the Mayan would you say down south?
I am the spokesperson, G. Michael Reed. I'm the spokesperson for the Toledo Alcaldes Association.
Which involves all the villages, the 41 villages that are Mayan villages?
These involve about 80 leaders, 2 from each of the 41 Maya villages. I'm also the spokesperson for the Maya Leaders Alliance, which is a coalition of indigenous leaders who have at one point or the other been leaders in their own right and have maintained interest and support of the Maya land rights struggle.
Do you believe that the Mayans that don't support you are only the ones who have been bought off, influenced in one way or the other, brainwashed? Why do you think some Mayans don't support Christina Chuck?
Cook.
I'm sorry. You have to forgive me with the pronunciation of the Mayan.
You confuse me with Mr. Chuck.
Yeah.
I can't. I have no way or no factual reason, determination to decide why one person would support the Maya land rights struggle or not. Okay, why they would support me personally, I don't need anybody to support me. I'm not asking for personal support.
But you are representing the Maya land rights project, so
I support the Maya land
that
rights
would be
project,
to support
yes.
you.
I support the Maya land rights project, yes, and I've been at the forefront.
Joel, can I just make 2 comments? Yeah, if you allow me, Mr. Chairman. you will note from history, recent history, that courts sometimes make decisions. And it's not so difficult in the decision. The challenge is the implementation of the
Yes.
decision.
Correct.
Let me comment on two things here. One, the private lands under the Constitution will allow the government to acquire it for a public purpose. But what would be the public purpose in this case? Because the public purpose must be for the common good.
Yeah.
Yes.
But this purpose will be for the good of a court ruling for the Mayan people, but not necessarily for the national good, unless you will interpret that ruling to be for the national good. So how do you explain that one? Because you're talking about property rights under the Constitution, which cannot be taken lightly. Because it's everybody's
but
right.
what are you asking, Mr. Quay? What land would the government take? What land are you imagining the government taking?
You see, in the conversation, I followed it. I think you are giving a very good account of I read the decision myself. It's pretty long. But I'm saying to you that I thought the same thing, that where there are private lands, not owned by Mayans, but they are being demarcated as part of the Mayan land-tenure rights. You mentioned that the government then will have the option to acquire it, which underlie can, but it must be for a public purpose. So my question to you, one, what is this public purpose in this case, if that should happen? And it's very likely you will be confronted with it. What would be the public purpose in this case?
Well, these private land holdings, these third parties, the government will have to resolve it, right? It's a situation where, imagine it like this. There's a house. Somebody claimed to own the house. And in the time that they claimed to own the house, they maybe sold off a part of it, or they rented off a part of it. And later on, somebody else came to say, you know what, actually that house does not belong to you. I am going to also make a claim on that house, and we're going to go to court, and the court will determine who owns the house. The court has determined that the other person owns the house, right? But in the meantime, you had already sold a part of the house, and you had already leased a part of the house, right? That is kind of the situation that we're in, isn't it? Because it is that the government believes.
In other words, the argument will have to be, right? The argument will have to be that the present owner is not the rightful owner because it was already owned by the Mayan people. So that would be the public purpose argument. I don't think it will be a public purpose.
I don't know how they will. Again, I don't know how they will resolve.
You are the lawyer, so I will. You see, I thought it would have been.
Actually,
I thought the argument would have been more on the grounds that if the government acquire private property and the owner goes to the court to say that you did not apply public purpose, and the court rules,
then it won't hold. It won't stand.
Christina,
that the rightful owner is in fact the person who owned the land. No, if the Mayans, as determined by the court, in fact owned the land over 100 years ago, so I would say that the rationale would have to be whoever bought it after did not really have a good title, not an absolute indefeasible title.
But they still have to be compensated.
That is an issue that I believe we'll be facing. The next thing I wanted to ask is that the decision, it seems that the core of the decision was based on the long-standing use and occupation by the Mayans. That was one of them for their customary purposes. So you have the squatters' right also. And the time period depends on whether it's national lands or private lands. But if you have another ethnic group or another race, whatever you want to define them as, who want to claim squatters' right because they have been living on the land undisturbed for the period which is required, either the 17 years or the 12 years. Why is it that those people then, who's right again? I suppose it will go back to the question of who won it first.
Yes, and
so
one of the...
Let's say the Garifano would have these squatters' right and lands that may be claimed now under the order of the court, under the consent order. It means that the same thing will apply, that it will be treated that the lands, they could not make a claim under the squatters' right because it belongs to the Mayan before you squat on it.
I think that gets overly go ahead.
I want to clarify, right? There are, I want to say 9 or 10 villages in Toledo that are not Maya villages. In addition, of course, to Punta Gorda town itself, right? We have to treat them case by case. In the case of Barranco, let's say, Barranco is, in Belize, the Garifuna are recognized as indigenous peoples, whether some agree or not, right? Nationally, they've been recognized as indigenous people by the government that we elect. And so they would have to be treated in, and their case would have to be treated in a distinct way because they can claim customary use of lands, right? And their customary use of lands needs to be protected just like the Maya people. No, other villages, the way, how do they own land? They own land, well, they have had to go through the national land system to acquire lands, either leasing it or buying it into private property. And so those villages will also have to, the government will also have to consider, take into consideration all the lands that they have been using, right? So it's not just you go and you take it away from them. The government has a difficult task to really consider all the people that will be affected by this now decision, but also by the demarcation process that has to happen. That said, if you think about the government as the government is the government we elect them to govern, right? We elect them to make good decisions, but they have to make these decisions through negotiated processes based on factual evidence, not just on emotions, not just on, oh, I don't think it's fair that the Maya people have more than I do. It has to be on a case-by-case basis where the facts are considered, right? If you have a community, for example, that has been there for many years, and that they have had private land holdings or lease holdings, the government will have to take that into consideration, and the Maya community will have to take that into consideration.
I'm glad you said that.
But it's a negotiated process. Yes. And so it can't also just be that people are just saying, well, I don't have a lease to it, I don't have a private property title to it, but I want it. It can't also just be like that. It has to also be where it's based on, were you using it? Are you using it? Do you have a fee simple title? Do you have a lease? Is there any evidence of like long-standing use and occupation on both sides?
Christina,
One question before I finish, please, one more. Where you have settled on the collective right, the title, let's say you reach the point now where a title will be given for the collective right. Is there, under the decision taken, that any time in the future, can that collective right, whatever authority will be under, a legal person, a natural person, whatever it is, will they have the right to sell any part of that communal land to individual?
The village will have to be given legal personality. I believe that's what you're asking. The village itself will have to be given legal personality. There's already a system of governance in the Maya villages where the village meeting is the highest authority for decision making, right? The decisions are made either by consensus or majority decision. When the community is given legal personality, then there's no question what the authority of the village meeting is, right? So the alcalde can't just make a decision on his own, or the village council can't just make a decision on its own. It will be very clear that the community has legal personality, right? So that is one thing. Your second question was, I forget.
No, I think that is answering it. In other words, all right, it will be like a limited liability company. It will be like a limited liability company, right? A legal person.
Oh, I remember your second question. The
second question that was following up is that would there be any provision anywhere where that land then, any part of it can be sold to a member of the community to have individual ownership?
The land cannot be, it's inalienable. That's the language that the law has used. It's inalienable, which means it cannot be sold, first of all, by any one person in the village, because it's owned under a collective title. I don't think that the community in and of itself even if, I mean, it would be a very high benchmark to reach if every single Maya person in that village were to agree to sell their collective title, right? The thing is, when you think about Indigenous people's rights to land, it's not just the people that are existing today, it's also future generations,
Yes,
right?
yes.
And so that's why this protection of inalienability is really critical, right? Because you want to make sure that there continues to be a place for future generations.
So
So let me ask you a question.
Exchange.
The inalienability cannot be overridden by unanimous consent. Cannot be overridden by unanimous consent.
I hope the government puts structure that it cannot, because I don't want to see that some Mayan in the future could be dispossessed of land. If they're claiming this land as communal land, it should be there that the community of Mayans that are participants in this have always have a place to get land, and not some one big private person bought it up and then we're back to the same place. Then we're just like in the oligarch back in Guatemala, where many of them flee from to try and make a life in Belize.
That's the dream, Greg. I mean, that's what we're hoping, right? And I know I've heard actually personal accusations that when and in fact the titles are given, that Christina will be in charge of all the lands and she can sell it to whoever she wants. That is not so, and that's
Christina will be queen.
Sure.
Listen,
I wanted to broach something. Go ahead, Mr.
I'm
Chairman.
going to question in here at some point, right? Now, Christina, tell me something. The people who are owning these individual lands that's within the communal land, what is the Mayans' vision for that? Do they want to see them out of there, or are they going to try to live with these people in some harmonious way?
I think it's mixed. I don't think it's one way across the board, right? I think that it's a case by case situation. For example, we have an area of land in one of our villages that when the company came, they had asked for 50 acres of land, and in the end, they ended up with 500 acres of land, and they now have a hydro dam there. They don't allow people to go in. This was an area that was used, the riverside that was used by the village many years before that. And so I think like in a situation like that, the village might want to recover those lands, right? But there are other situations. For example, the community I come from, there's at least one third party or two third party that are there that have, get along with the community. The community might ask them to officially become members of the community so that they can enjoy the full interest and rights under that collective title. Whether or not they want to agree to this clause that we just talked about, that the land is inalienable, is another question. I mean, they'll have to decide that, right? But there may be situations where the community will want to enter into an agreement with that third party. They might be a friendly neighbor. They might be somebody that they get along with, and they might want to enter into an agreement.
People change over time, and interests change over time. So you may be friendly today, and tomorrow you are at each other's throat. But I had another question. The way I see this moving forward is probably at different tiers of communal land, right? Where there is the area that could be agreed upon immediately, and then there's the area where they have the communal land and the private land interests, and then thirdly, a wider swath of land where the government has interests and negotiate with the Mayan communities as to when infrastructure is to be put in, concessions is to be granted, and public spaces, and even future development land for the general population of Belize within that Toledo district and that 75% of the land that's there, because that's the only way I see that they could have some agreement and have some way of moving forward with all the interests and maintaining the harmony and tranquility of the area. Could you speak to that a little bit, if you may?
The only difficulty with that, Greg, is that you have to understand, and I think that this is where we get stuck a lot of times. We fail to understand what the customary use and practices of the Maya people are, right? And sometimes it's not our fault. It's that we're not there. We don't know. But the way that Maya people use land, right? A lot of times it's seen as just where their residences are, where their houses are. This is only one way in which they use lands, where their houses are. But they use the land to collect, for example, housing materials, to go and collect their medicines, to practice their spirituality. They use the land to recreate. They use a lot of the watersheds as their main source of water for bathing, washing, doing everything. And so their customary use area is not one place. So if you were to say, well, we're gonna do it in tiers, then how do you, or different levels, how do you accommodate then the customary livelihood practices of the Maya communities? Do you
Yeah, I
restrict?
understand what you're saying, but how many Mayan people goes to the river and take a shower in modern society? You see what I'm saying? So I
41
understand.
villages.
Go
41
ahead.
Maya villages, right, that have rivers.
But
They use
people
it.
don't go to the most people are not going to the river in
They do.
modern society. No, that some people do. Some people do. I see pictures of it, but that's not a standard thing in
But
modern.
why are we trying to what are you saying? What are you saying? That they're not supposed to, that they should be more modern, that they should follow
No, I'm not. No. I'm appalled to modernity.
Christina, is there any concern among the Maya that there might emerge some type of youth authoritarian system, and that a group of people might just take control of these communal lands and suppress the rest of the Mayan population? Has that concern been considered?
Well, of course, and that is why you want to give legal personality to the community itself, so that it is the village meeting, it is the collective that continue to make decisions on those lands, right? If you understand the collective system, the communal system, that word has been demonized so much, I don't even like to use it.
But let's explain that a bit about, because I wanted to get to that point. Yes, the communal system. What exactly does that entail?
So what it entails is that there is lands that are used collectively by all members of the community, right? But within that collective use of land, within that collective tenure system, there are individual interests and rights, right? So for example, people will have their own individual place where they have their residence, their own individual farms. In fact, let me give you an example. When Maya people who extract the copal resin, that is registered as an individual interest. So while they didn't plant the copal tree, if it is a grove that they have been tapping for a number of years, then that gets seen as their individual interest, right?
Is there a tax or some money paid into the community as such that runs the communal land? Do the people, the money they make, does a part of that go to some organization that runs the communal lands?
You want to know if the money comes to me, G. Michael Reed?
No.
There's no money. There's no money.
You won't always be there, but there will be people who will be in control, in charge of things.
And infrastructure has to be developed.
Is there a collective, cooperative kind of move where when somebody plants on the communal land, then everybody reaps from the benefits of that?
No. What you plant is what you reap. That is seen as your individual.
Everybody still keeps their one little corner of the land.
Absolutely, and nobody steals. Everybody has the same thing.
So why can't it be then that the government just say, look, the Mayans have been there. Let us allocate this portion of land. Let us give it out to the Mayans. Every Mayan can get a piece of land that they can pass down to their future generations. Why is it so important to have the communal land?
Because that's not a decision for you or I or the government to make. That's a decision for the community to make. And if the communities want to continue to have, because in the collective use, there's also shared spaces, right? There's places that cannot be owned, cannot be registered as individual interests. For example, the river, right? You can't own the river. You can't restrict people from using it. This is a collective space. There are sacred sites, for example, that are seen as collective and shared spaces. So to go back though, is there a system in which somebody could become authoritarian and rule over these lands?
Oh, yeah.
This is why I go back, that what we protect is the fundamental authority of the village meeting to make decisions. No one person should be making those decisions. It should be made as a collective, what is the best interest of the community. And so we are not immune to corruption, G. Michael Reed. I will be the first to admit that. Belize, we've seen a lot of corruption. Even with the government we elect, we've seen a lot of corruption. But the more you ground governance in the people deciding in a direct democracy, the more you have accountability for those decisions, because it's the people that are making.
Would that we could rely on that in every aspect of our society. Let me go to Julian Chubb's comments. Why so much concern about the Mayan people, and what about the Mennonites? They have a similar system. Why people not questioning them and how they acquire their lands? Do you see any similarity between what the Mayans are doing and what the Mennonites are doing, say, in Spanish Lookout or Blue Creek?
Well, the Mennonites have a collective land tenure system too. That's perhaps the only other group in Belize that has a collective land tenure system.
But certainly
But
not
they did not inherit it. They went and bought their land. So that's quite different than saying we have indigenous rights.
They went and bought their land. Yes, right.
It's a whole different approach.
That's one distinction. They went and bought their land. The other distinction is that they're not indigenous. That's the other distinction.
Are the Mayan leaders association telling village people that if they're not with the Mayan, the MLA, they need to move out?
I don't know. I mean, as far as I know, no. I am a part of the if you're referring to the Maya Leaders Alliance, the Toledo Alcaldes Association, or the Julian Trust Society, no, that is not so.
You have not been asking people to move out of their respective lands.
G. Michael Reed, we don't have the authority to do that.
Yeah, you know what? G. Michael had brought up money, and I wanted to talk a little bit about money, Christina, because we know that your organization or the Maya organization is funded, and I just wanted, if you are at liberty, to talk about how some of those fundings are. And my concern particularly is also, are some of those funding coming from Guatemala?
I saw your question that you said. Your question was more pointed. Does the organization receive funding from the government of Guatemala?
Yes.
The answer is no. No. In fact, we don't even receive funding from the government of Belize.
Well, I'm sure.
There, right?
But how is your funding structured? Is it foreign interest that funds the organization? Is there a budget? That I'm trying to figure out what's going on with that.
The Maya land tenure struggle is a part of a global struggle, right? We're not the only indigenous people in the world that are struggling for the affirmation of our rights and the protection of our rights. We are a part of a global movement. There are many indigenous people around the world that are doing the same thing we are doing. And so we have collaborated with globally with many partners, with many donors, with many collaborators that have provided endless time, endless pro bono support. If you I know a lot of times you wondered, and I know somebody even said Andrew Marshallek was our legal counsel at some point. That is not true. But many of our legal support has come through pro bono support from friends to the Maya people. But the real question that you want to ask, Gregory, and I was hoping you would just ask it pointedly. There's no need to be afraid to ask it. Do we declare our funding source? Are we transparent in the funding that we manage? Now, let me explain something to you. The MLA and the TA, they do not administrate funding. They're not NGOs. They're not registered NGOs. As I explained earlier, the TA is the traditional governance institution of the Maya, and the MLA is a customary institution. They do collaborate. There is an NGO, the Julian Trust Society, who has fiduciary responsibility. It's a registered organization. It follows all the laws of Belize. In fact, the funds have been managed to meet the requirements of the legislation. They do annual audits, for instance. They subscribe to the FIU, all the things that are required under the laws of Belize. But what is important here is really that this is an opportunity, really, for the government to really invest and double its interest in investing in the implementation of this decision, because a lot of this has been shouldered by the Maya community. All the mapping work that's being done is being paid by the Maya community. It's not being paid by the government of Belize, and it is their obligation to do it, right? That's what the court told them to do. The court also told them to set aside some money in the beginning, set aside some money to begin this process. Up to this day, we've not seen where that money has been invested.
And I'm sure the money they have set aside, I heard something about 100,000, and when I look at something like this, it's going to be in the range of millions of dollars to get this done properly and to make it legislation and satisfactory and whatever we need to do to incorporate it into the Constitution, because something as big as this definitely has to be part of the Constitution, I believe, to some degree.
Talking about getting it done properly, how far are we along in that regard, Christina, as far as getting it done? Where would you say we're 50% of the way?
Not nearly.
5% of the way?
Yeah.
I don't know that I would measure it that way. I can tell you what has been done. The process of mapping has begun. There has
on your part, not on the part of the government, though.
It is a part of the same process. We're not doing anything unilaterally. Like I said to you.
But are you working together, or you said the Mayans are doing all the work? Right? You said that everything is being done by the Mayan, funded by the Mayan.
Yes, let me explain. Let me explain. When you're before the courts, you don't do anything without an agreement between both parties. We have an established procedure for doing mapping, right? That was agreed by the government of Belize and the Maya party.
Some parties, some private owners I know were complaining about Mayan people coming onto their private property and cutting down trees and placing markers saying that this was part of Mayan land.
I have heard you say that before. Yes, I've heard you.
And I've heard that from looking at tapes of people complaining about such. I don't know it to be.
Is that hearsay or is that fact? Because I find that hard to believe. I've never heard. In fact, I've heard you say, I am appalled that the organization is cutting down trees. And as far as I know, we've not cut down any trees in this process. What I can tell you is that if that were the case, that private landowner can go to the authorities, can report it. The Maya people are not immune to the laws. If there is damage to property, if there's trespass happening, then the authorities can, in fact, resolve those issues, right? But let's not go to the hearsay. I wanted to come back to the previous question. Remind me, G. Michael Reed, what was that question that we were talking about before?
You got me. But I want before we go there, hold on. This guy Maya Prince, because I want to say what he say. The Maya people see land as a way of survival, while the ordinary Belizean see land as an estate. Perhaps that is what blinds them from seeing it from the Maya perspective. Maybe you're generalizing, sir. You don't. We see land also as a means of survival. So I don't see that as being a fair comment at all. And if we get to the point where we'll be dividing ourselves against each other, we will not get out of this anytime soon. I don't quite recall what we're talking about something, and it's important because but nevertheless, that's all right. Let's move on. Let me ask you a question before we go any further, because the Mayans now as a group, has there been any consensus, any feeling about the situation? Because we're talking about indigenous people, and I believe the Palestinians are indigenous people. Has there been any thought along that line as to what's the feeling from the Mayans as the situation in Gaza stands?
Well, I haven't had the privilege of actually convening or we haven't convened a meeting to discuss and deliberate on what a position would be one way or the other. But I can tell you from from my personal perspective is that the Maya people have always stood against injustices, have always stood against atrocities and harm done to people. Any people, it doesn't matter what your religion is, what your nationality is. Any violation of human rights would be against a position that we would stand with. I mean, I think that life is to be preserved at all costs. I think that there are many innocent children and families that are being harmed on both sides. And I think that there needs to be a serious reflection on how, as nation states, we really have to protect and preserve life. And so that's my personal, I can't say that I have a position on behalf of the Maya people. I don't think that any meeting has been convened to discuss that one way or the other.
Let me
Remember your question, G. Michael Reed.
You remember it?
Yes.
Where were we? Go ahead.
Where are we at in terms of the status of
Yes.
implementation? I was getting to the mapping procedure. So we have an agreed mapping procedure, and the step one in that mapping procedure is auto delimitation. The court told the government that they have to work with the Maya people to identify where those lands are. And so the Maya people are going through the first step, which is to describe their customary use area. For instance, we've done some ethno maps to show the places that we use and the evidence of how we use it and why we use it. They have begun to talk with their neighbors to clarify where their boundaries are between their neighbors. A lot of the work that has been done has been more between Maya to Maya neighbors. We have not touched any of the boundaries that are adjacent to non-Maya villages, for example, because this will have more involvement from the government, because the government would have to show where private lands are, where leased lands are, etc.
Let me get to a couple of questions from the audience. Number one is, what percentage do you have to be Mayan to be a part of this whole Mayan program and be involved in the communal land project? Do you have to be a full-blooded Maya? Can you be part Maya? Would you have to prove that? That's one question. Yeah.
Can I answer that?
Yes, please.
0%. In fact, we have non-Mayas who are members of our villages who have full interest and rights like every member of the Maya village that they ascribe to.
I see. All right. The next one is that why aren't the Mayans of the North coming to your aid? Are there different type of Maya up north? Are they the Yucatan Mayas? What?
Why aren't they coming to our aid?
Yeah, or are they? I guess the question would be: have they gone to your aid? Is there a cohesive unit here? Are you guys all together on one page?
Well, we work together. We collaborate with each other. In fact, we have Yucatec Mayas from the north that have come to work here in Toledo. Many of them, friends of the Maya of Toledo. Maybe the question is, have they also made similar claims? And the answer is, as far as I know, no. They have not tried to make claims in the north or the west where they find themselves residing.
What group of Maya did Marcos Canul lead?
Marcos Canul, I believe that was the Yucatec Maya in the Yucatan.
So he was not involved with the southern area where you guys are at all, huh?
Quechua and Mopan, yeah.
Not the Quechua and not the Mopan.
I see. Joe, I see your eyes are bun up. What am I going to say?
No, I was thinking I can understand the issue of the long-standing use and occupation. I think that applies, in this quarter is right issue to us. What I find difficult to be able to foresee is that as it evolves, what the future will be like. For the reason that, and I think Mr. Morrison may have mentioned it, I'm not too sure whether your customary practices will be able to outlive the need to disintegrate. In other words, I take it that the whole idea was grounded in the long-standing use and occupation, customary use, because the land did provide physical comfort and spirituality to the Mayans. And I think those things went a far way to give them those rights. But I suspect that some of the same things that history have given them to win a case before the court, I don't know how long those circumstances will continue. So if the circumstances change, and to use a simple word, which Mr. Morrison seems to have an aversion to, but a historian one time, when I was then living in PG for 2 years and months, and I used to visit all, I used to go by horse, by boat. And he said to me, the historian, he said, you know something? He said, it's unfortunate that modernity came to these people. He said, because these people were far better and happier before modernity came. Now, that to me was not even the modernity that we think of today. So I see the future as one that once the customary period has passed and the modernity inevitable likely to come in, what will happen? But I suppose right now that is looking too much into the future.
No, but that's an interesting point, Joe. Christina, you want to respond to that?
Absolutely. Well, Mr. Joe, let's just put it this way, right? Culture is not static. Customs are not static. They are dynamic. They respond to change in circumstances, right? All of us people have customs, but we change according to our circumstances. And Maya communities are not immune to globalization. Globalization is happening all around us, right? We can't sort of lock ourselves in a box and say that's not going to affect us. We have, I can tell you from the time we started in the, well, I've been involved for 20 years, Julian more than I, and leaders even far more than I, right? And from the time this struggle started, you can see a lot of changes. We have a lot of young people now who want to be more capitalistic and individualistic in the way that they think and behave and act. And that's fine. I mean, that's their choice, right? But so you see changes happening all the time.
But now, should you consider them, or do you trap them in a system that you're establishing there, which is the old communal way?
You don't trap nobody, G. Michael Reed. Everybody has a right to determine their own future. What you're fighting for, though, is the right to self-determination, because the self-determination is that it gives you the ability to decide what is in your best interest, what are your needs according to your own time. Right,
but isn't it almost like having your cake and eating it too? Because you have this ancient way of communal land existence, and you're claiming the communal land, but you also want the young people to think for themselves and modernize themselves, uplift themselves when they want to. It's kind of like they just not seem to go hand in hand.
What you're ascribing to is to protect the values, the philosophy, the cosmovision of your people and your history, right?
Yeah.
So if you have a collective value, right? We did a project about I want to say, I don't remember what year exactly, 2009 maybe, where we after the first decision, we went to the community and said, what is the future of the Maya people, right? What is the future we dream? What will we look like in 100 years? I know that Mr. Koye had said on one of the shows, well, they might not even be there in 1,000 years, right? I hope that they're still there. I hope that my people continue to persevere. We might not look the same way. I mean, clearly, if you look at me right now, if I were 100 years back, I wouldn't necessarily look the way that I look right now. But what I'm pointing to is that we still ascribe to our value system. When we think about ourselves, we think about ourselves as Ralchoch. In my language, in Kekchi, that means we are children of the earth. We ascribe to that, which means we have a system of respect for Mother Earth. We have a system of reciprocity where we look after each other. We have a collective system where we help each other. And that, I don't know for how long we will sustain it, but that's really what you're ascribing to. So when you say things might change, they have already changed. When people say, well, if they want communal land rights, make them go back and live in the top houses. Look, man, we have all kinds of houses these days, right? People change according to their circumstances. People have a right to their own development. People have a right to describe their own interests and needs. And so this is essentially what you're asking for the Maya people. And I think that they have a right to have that, like every other society, every other group.
Let me ask you a question. Was under the British rule way back when the Mayans were and the settlement was just coming into being, did the British ever put the Mayans and the native people on what would have been termed reservations? Do you know of any history that would entails that type of?
Yes. Yes, the colonizers here were no different from the colonizers in North America and everywhere else. They tried to pen people up in one small box. They tried to create, historically, you will see that they tried to create 3 reservations in Belize. One in Northwest Belize, around Socots area. I know Socots has been in the news this week, so I'm happy to be able to point that out. They tried to create one in the San Antonio area, the San Antonio Reservation. They tried to create 2 in Toledo. And historically, you will see that what they could not do was to contain all the Maya people in that little box that they were trying to create, because people moved for different reasons. People were using the land in many different ways. Sometimes they were in search of higher ground. Sometimes they were in search of more watersheds. And they were somewhat nomadic, so they were moving around the land all the time. And the British colonial masters were frustrated with it, of course. Another way they tried to control the Maya was to impose a tax. They asked them, they said that they would recognize the native leaders, the chiefs, and they would call them alcaldes. In fact, that's a colonial term that was imposed.
Exactly.
Alcaldes, and the alcalde would work for the colony, and the alcalde would collect a $5 tax off every family. So that was another way they tried to control the Maya, the reservation, the taxing system. They established the church, and they established schools to also control. I mean, these are colonial systems that have been established to control indigenous societies, and Belize was no different from that. We went through that as well.
Do you see the Mayans continue to live together as a community, but under individual land ownership rather than communal?
Yes, I see a situation where that would be possible as well. In fact, we have a lot of Mayans living all over Belize with individual private property. So yes, I've seen that happen as well.
Christina, have you taken a poll of the Mayan? We know many of them are from Guatemala. Many jump back and forth between Belize and Guatemala. How do the Mayans feel about the Guatemalan claim issue? Are they solidly Belize, or are they ambivalent on that situation?
You know, I wish I could show you. Show you the first letter that was sent when this claim arose again. Most recently, I think it was in and around late 1990s, early 2000, right? The Maya were the only group, as far as I know, and the first group, if not the only, the first group who put out a very public statement to defend the sovereignty of Belize. We are Belizean Maya people. In fact, I've heard the arguments many times, oh, we're allowing our Guatemalan relatives to come in and be in the land. Listen, we have immigration in Toledo just like everywhere else. And if they are being allowed, then the authorities are not doing their jobs. I know for a fact that the Toledo Alcaldes Association have held for the last 20 years that I've been a part of them. They have held this law, this customary law, this principle that no alcalde should allow any Guatemalan residents into their villages unless they have gone through the process of immigration and that they have been accepted by this country to be a citizen of Belize, right? We are very clear that we're not trying to be separate from Belize. We're not trying to support the Guatemalan claim. In fact, if we weren't here on this land, I think the Guatemalans would already have taken over.
And the Mayans would have been displaced for sure.
I spent almost 3 years in Toledo, second in charge of the district then, during the period when you had they call district commissioner.
Mm-hmm.
So all of those villages were like my home. I would eat with them, the pigs. We eat the pigs because that was the favorite. We eat the turkey and whatnot. But I can say this to you. I did close my eyes to the cross-border trade because they didn't come into the town. But I can say this to you. All of them that I met, whether it was San Antonio, Colombia, Otosha, Dolores, and we go there and horseback sometime. We get there by river, we get there by walking because there were no roads. But they were patriotic people. They were extremely patriotic to this country. To the point that the Mayans across the border, the Mayans on the other side wanted to come and live in Belize.
Yeah.
Let me tell you just once I can tell you the story.
So I can vouch for their patriotism.
About the story of Sagastume. Although the Maya people were never regarded for his capture, but I can tell you that the man whose father was alcalde at the time of his capture is still alive today. In fact, is one of the Maya leaders. They never gave them the credit, but those alcaldes came together to capture Sagastume. And I mean, history doesn't lie. I mean, you'll see where they have been very patriotic, as you say. They don't see a contradiction between their identity as indigenous or as Belizean.
They were vehemently opposed to Sagastume.
The other day, there was supposed to be a debate at the University of Belize, and I understand it was shut down by the Mayans. You want to speak about that first? What happened? What transpired there? Why did the Mayan object to that debate?
I am always appalled at the hearsay and how much that becomes taken as fact.
The narrative. Yeah, go ahead.
As far as I know, the debate was not shut down. In fact, I was invited as a guest speaker to the class. I went to speak to the class. I spoke just like I am to you. Took all their questions, listened to them, helped to make some clarifications. I think that their debates are still ongoing. They were debating not just on the Maya land issue. Actually, it's a critical thinking class that was debating on many different issues. Health. This was only one of the topics.
So you supported it and did not shut it down. Is that it? That was a wrong report. Because I heard it from a couple of people.
Never, I don't have the authority to shut down anything, G. Michael Reed.
Did the Mayans object to the debate because they were concerned that the students were going to ask questions that wasn't in favor of the MLA?
Well, let me just put it to you straight. Who are you saying are the Mayans? Because I know a few people who had a contention with the title of the debate. I saw that. Right. They did bring that to my attention. I did see some people taking issue with it. But when you say, did the Mayans object? Some people did. But can you say that that's like all the Mayans are objecting, all the Mayans are shutting down? I don't think
it wasn't an official statement on the Mayans that we don't want this debate.
No.
All right, I just wanted to clear that up. I don't know. Somebody up here is saying something about racist remarks against the Mayans. I don't remember many of them. There might have been a few tonight. Yes. Okay. But we'll go on with that. Guys, we're getting to that point almost. You're going to have to come up with any questions. One of them I had for Christina. One of them they ask me for ask Christina. But Christina, we really we appreciate you coming, and you're brave. I tell you what, above everything else, you have not shied away from the criticisms and the questions and whatnot. And I know you've come on a lot of fire. Do you sometimes have second thoughts and say, boy, what have I taken on here? This might be a bit much. Or do you really consider it a badge of honor?
This is a true commitment on my part. I'm a human rights advocate. I really believe in people's human rights. I really believe also in indigenous people's rights. I made this commitment when I was 16 years old and Julian was killed. That's when I made this commitment, that to honor him would be to continue the struggle that he started. And so this is not a career for me. It's not a hobby. It's certainly not fun half the time. But certainly it is a life struggle for me. It's a commitment for me, as is the case globally with many human rights defenders and land rights defenders, indigenous activists. And we come under threat all the time. Our lives have been threatened. Our families have been harassed. Many insults are hurled at you. But every day I wake up, I thank the Creator for giving me another day to continue to fight against injustices.
You are an attorney, correct? You did go and study law and
No, no, no. And I meant to, thank you for reminding me. That's what I wanted to tell Mr. Joe. I know you said I'm the lawyer. I'm actually not an attorney. I'm not a trained attorney. I've never been.
what did you study? What did you study abroad?
My background is actually in natural resource management. I'm a
Okay.
biologist.
Interesting. All right.
I had the
Yeah, you go ahead. Go
yeah,
ahead,
I
Joe.
had the question. Sorry. Well, I had some question, but I read the judgment today for the first time, and I was impressed with it, no doubt, because it opened my eyes to the natural rights of human beings in the context of the Mayan judgment. So I get to understand why, indeed, at the end, both parties ran for the consent agreement.
Right.
Because
Right.
the evidence was overwhelming that it was their rights. And when I looked at all that was happening in the Inter-American Commission for Human Rights, the American Declaration, which is part of the Organization of the American States that we are a member of. So I found overwhelming evidence, indeed, beginning with Conte. I think Conte did a lot of research. He was a personal friend of mine. And his research had helped the Mayans in their case before the Caribbean Court of Justice.
Yes.
And I was impressed with it. I must say that he really gave me the insight I wanted to for the justification of the Mayan land rights. And I feel quite contented now to know that it is in fact their natural rights.
I kind of believe that Chief Justice Conte actually overplayed his hand in to some extent in his ruling. And it's not that Mayan don't have the rights we're talking about, but I believe when he addressed the case, he went beyond what was the boundaries of the case in making his ruling to some extent. And I know following courts have agreed with him, but that still remains my opinion, because the claim and the concern at that time was just basically on the concession rights that was given and without consultation. And while I do believe and I do agree with the court, and even before the court, I would agree that Mayans do have ancestral rights. The boundaries of it is what I have concerns with, as it engulfs so much of the land and affecting so much of other property rights.
But you know,
what specifically, Mr. Morrison? What specifically is the area that you disagree with Conte?
Well, I believe he overplayed when he made and when he assigned so much to communal land rights in when the case before him was just to address whether they had rights to appeal the government ruling about them not having any control, and it was Crown land.
We're running out of time. We can't try the case again. We can't try the case tonight.
He went way beyond that.
That's what I said. That's why I said he went beyond that point.
We can't try the case again right now.
We can't, but can I make one last comment on that?
Would you say that was made on the basis
Joe,
before
we're not trying that case tonight. Go ahead, Christina. You were making a point.
I just wanted to ask Mr. Morrison if he...
need to make it now. I think I have a right to
Yeah,
correct
just
it.
talk all night, Joe. Just talk. Yeah,
Yes,
go ahead.
let me talk, please. I read it today, and I must disagree with Mr. Morrison when he said Conte overplayed hand, as if though he made a judgment based on something other than what was brought before the court.
But
Conte did the most extensive
Gregory has a point to his opinion. His opinion is that he
Yes, but
didn't
I'm saying
agree.
here, Mr. Chairman, I respect one's opinion, but when it's not backed up by informed.
Okay,
That's
Christina,
what I
you are making a
disagree
point
with.
on
I'm
that.
not having
Let's
I'm
Joe.
not having any difference with Mr. Morrison
man.
personally, you know.
Yeah,
I'm
that's
only
all
trying
right,
to
man.
make my point clear.
Joe. Enough.
Yes, man, yes.
Go ahead, Christina. What you were
I just
saying,
have
man.
I have a question for Mr. Morrison. Would you feel the
Yes.
same way about the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights' decision Do you feel that they also made a mistake too, or they overplayed their hands as well? Because there was a decision by Conte, and then there was also a decision by the Inter-American Commission. So do you believe as well that they overplayed their hands?
Well, as I said, I do believe that communal land rights exist.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that when he ruled on it, however, it was not what was exactly before him, and that he made it so pervasive that we are here today. But even beside that, the rights exist, and I said that my only concerns about it is how it's playing out today and the extent of land that's being considered and how it will affect the future development and harmony of the country. That's my only concern about it.
Christina, we're talking about before boundaries were drawn, that at the time of where people lived before. Haven't we gotten to the point now where we understand that this is one earth, and if it was before the boundaries were drawn, aren't we all then in effect indigenous people wherever we were born and wherever we lived? We are all entitled to this earth. To draw an area aside and say, well, this is for the Mayan, this is for the Mennonites, this is for the Spanish up in the north, is that not counterproductive and not going against the grain of progressive living for everyone?
So let me put it to you this way. If there was a family that had 2 children, and one of the child they fed the best foods that they could give to this child, they're the same age, and the other one they locked up in the cellar and they fed him nothing, and this child became malnourished, and then they put them to run a marathon together, who you think is going to win? The child that they nourished or the child that they deprived?
I don't think that's fair, though, because are you going to punish the one that was better nourished
I don't think
because
so.
of the one that wasn't?
You're not punishing. You're trying to shift the imbalance of power that exists. You're trying to shift the imbalance, the inequality.
Can you really make up for things like that? Can you really? And
I don't think that you can get everything that you've lost, but I think that you damn well should try, because why would you leave the other to suffer, right, from all these injustices?
But
here's the thing: if you look globally, you will see that indigenous peoples all around the world, from the parts that they
have suffered.
Been dispossessed of their land. They've suffered. They've been trying to recover. They've been trying to reclaim. They've been trying to find their own self-determined futures. I don't think that you can say they should be denied that.
But that is also one of the issues that I have with Chief Justice Conte.
Can I add something to that, please? I'm saying again that if we take time out and at least read the court's decision, you will get information.
I think we all read it. I think we all read it several times.
There are over 300 million indigenous people on this earth.
And I do not subscribe that Belize has treated indigenous
this decision
people.
Given by the court is not a decision that is isolated. This decision has been given all over the world for indigenous people.
Yeah, but to me, there's certain grievance.
Pointed out in the court wrong. Why
there's certain grievance
became a consent order? Because we realized that he was up against a case that he couldn't win.
I understand. And it was better. There was no way of for the government to lose and have any implementation. So the consent order was the best solution to move this forward, and the failure of the government to act in good nature to try and bring about a solution, consecutive government of Belize has been why we're here today.
Christina, let me just end on this, if you don't mind. Could I end on this? What is it that the Caribbean Court of Justice did not uphold, which came from the appellate court, was the pecuniary and the non-pecuniary compensation for the Mayans, which the court had given them.
Yes.
And that is what the Caribbean Court of Justice
that would have been a burden on the nation state.
What the Caribbean Court of Justice did, he said he will treat the decision as the reparation and the implementation of it, because it was not a case of looking to guarantee something that had already existed. Mm-hmm. So it made it clear that the only thing they didn't get in the end, which is when they went to the Caribbean Court of Justice, the Mayan group didn't go on the basis of who would have the right to the land. They went for the compensation, and there was a cross appeal.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, I believe indeed that that decision given was out of what has gone through 3 litigations, one at the Supreme Court, one at the Appeal Court, and one at the Caribbean, and they all agree in the end. And that one
Christine, I'll
point
say
gave
this:
rise to my advice.
I do believe one of the most deprived people in our country have been the Mayans. Historically, I think they have been given a very bad rap. You see what I'm saying? That's what I've concluded.
Well, the Garinagu would maybe have something to say about that. They feel like they were treated quite terribly themselves.
Yeah, they were, but in terms of Mayan, they were really given a bad pass.
Well,
So
they were
Vital, and they're probably one of the
exterminated,
poorest. They're one of the poorest set of Belizeans, I do believe.
But if you look at what came out of that, again, inciting to the millions of people who in fact was so deprived by the colonizers and the brutality.
Yes.
So what the courts are doing in the world today, this thing have gained international acceptance. But there is a warning.
But see, that's the problem, because
maybe reparation is next, huh?
All over the world.
Reparation might be next, Joe.
That's the problem I see.
They're giving them. That's what they're talking about next.
Yeah, and that's what I see with the broad ruling of the court, because I think in some ways, while the Mayans in Belize under the current government structure are not abused or mistreated or killed or anything like that under our government system in Belize, this happens in other countries. I don't want to name any country right now, but it happens. It certainly happens.
Christina,
and so I think when they ruled, they didn't take into consideration the character of Belize. In some respect.
Are you, Christina, optimistic that this is going to end well, that at some point down the road we'll be able to come to a good understanding and move forward as one country, all of us together?
Yes, I do believe that. I do believe that, and I do believe that that is what we're pursuing. I think with being able to talk openly about these things as we're doing now, being able to always be open to dialogue and education. I think the government does have a role to play, though, and they're not playing it well. I think that they have a responsibility to do more public education on this issue. They should just come out and help the public to understand and appreciate what the judgment said, what the rights are, how it impacts people. I think that they should be talking some more. They should certainly be doing a lot wider outreach to the general
people. The people, of course, also has a role to play. Do you believe that the non-Mayan people in the Toledo district are being unreasonably staunch about their point of view? Do you think they could be doing more to help this along? Are they being unfair to the Mayans going forward?
You mean, are the non-Maya villages being unfair to the Mayans?
Right. Are they not being cooperative in bringing about the implementation of this?
No, I wouldn't say so. I wouldn't say so. Honestly, I don't think that it's their fault that they are being led down this very divisive sort of road. Right, we see the narratives that.
You said you use the term being led. You don't think that
they're protecting their rights? I don't think they are being led. They are concerned about their rights.
There's a lot of reason why people became fearful, and a lot of it comes from what Joe just said. If we would take the time to read the judgment, if we would take the time to understand what is being recognized, if we would take the time to recognize what your rights are as well, that you are as a Belizean also have rights, and that we cannot infringe on your rights, I think that you would be less fearful. But it does not help when the politicians continue to push these narratives that are very divisive, that incite violence, that talk about Maya people expanding without even having a factual basis for that talk about Maya people being alarmist without having a factual basis for that. I think that the whole notion of balkanization, for example, the fact that it came from a very powerful person, words have consequences. It creates these real fear among people, right? And I think that we have to be guarded as leaders in how we say it. but I think public education would go a long way.
You know, I hear you and Joe talking about the law and the court and the decision of the court and whatnot, but we have seen courts hand down decisions that have been very unpopular and even unfair in some instances. So I think we have to also look at that side of it. We understand that the interests of not only the Mayan are important here, but the interests of all the other members of this community in which we live, this society, this country name believes. So we have to take everybody's interest into consideration, certainly including the Mayan. People, we're out of time. Christina, we want to say thank you very much. You're a real Trojan gal. We're coming out of this more enlightened and with more respect for you even. But certainly this is a fight that will go on. It's a conversation that has to continue. We need to keep talking about it. Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Gregory. CY, it's time. Thanks again, Christina.
Thanks
Thank
for
you
joining
all.
us. And thanks to all those that have
Thank you
joined
to
us.
Christina.
Yeah.
And let me remind you that my great-great-grandmother was a Mayan.
Well,
Okay.
that explains it. Still,
That's a
you're
fact.
not going to get any communal long life.
That's a fact.
Yeah, no good on there can claim nothing, all right? You're not going to get run
She was
out
a
of your
midwife.
marriage.
She was a midwife, a Mayan.
If Joe could push that in, it says that I have 2% in my DNA indigenous Central American and Caribbean blood.
It-
So I got something in there too, Christina. So
And look at me, Christina. Don't we look alike? My grandmother was a Jamaican. My grandfather was Jamaican. Grandmother was a Maya Indian from the
That's right.
Caspars and yeah. So
That's
we
right. You
all
are a
got
cross
some
between
Maya
a
in
Mayan
us,
and
right?
an African.
But at the end of the day, let us hope that we're all Belizeans,
Belizeans,
first and
yes.
foremost, moving
Yes.
forward. Respect every time. Thanks a lot. See
Bye-bye.
why? Fall asleep on me there, boy. Let's go. Give me all the music.
Thank you very much for joining us.
If I'm know you give you extra time with me and stay, right? And talk some more. All
Good night,
right.
Mr. Corey. Good night,
Interesting.
Mr.
Good night, guys.
Daniel.
Interesting conversation. Respect every time. Come on.
Yeah. How are you? This thing not show me. Send them out of work, yeah. You know,